Hi, thank you for watching. This is AmK at Purple Sky 11, and if you're just tuning in for this video, this is the second part of a video about the missing testosterone evidence, and this one picks up immediately following the first part. So if you're just finding this video, you should probably stop it right here and go to the description box where you can find the link to the first part of part 15 about the missing evidence, and watch that before you watch this. If you have watched the first part, then welcome back, and without any more bullshit, let's just get right into the evidence. So the fact that neither the Georgia Bureau of Investigations nor the Fayette County Sheriff's Department have any post-mortem toxicology on Benoit's urine showing elevated testosterone is seriously troubling, because this is a transcript of a press conference that was held literally on the steps of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation Crime Lab. And Dr. Chris Benoit, who was chief medical examiner at the time, announced the results of the toxicology testing in front of a crowd of media and their crew. And every test he mentions is accounted for, except for this urine analysis that supposedly proves an elevated level of testosterone. Now, it says along with other analyses that were done in the urine. Yeah, well, then I'd like to know where those tests are. Did they send this? Did they outsource this urine test like they did the DNA and the toxic chemicals in the water bottle found by Benoit's body? I don't know. If they did, I can't find anybody mentioning it anywhere. They just keep talking about this additional toxicology test on the urine. And the way Dr. Sperry presents this information, it's like he's thanking the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, and the fact that this is happening in front of the GBI building makes me think that these were the tests that the Georgia Bureau of Investigations conducted, but it just doesn't seem to exist. If it did exist, it doesn't anymore. And if you watch the video where I fixed the Nancy Benoit autopsy, you can see why it's curious that they even had any urine from Chris Benoit to do this analysis. But I guess, you need to have urine in order to do a urine analysis that would indicate an elevated level of testosterone, wouldn't you? See how this is getting a little bit twisted up here? But let's see what else Dr. Sperry says here, because then he's asked some questions by the dozen or so news reporters that are there. So let's keep going here. Question: Dr. Sperry, talk about how out of whack the testosterone level was in his system as compared to a normal person's. So again, right away, the press is driving home that testosterone. Dr. Sperry's response is, well, the level was elevated. The measurement was done in the urine because this is routinely the way that steroid and testosterone-like drugs are measured in, by looking at the urine, and especially in post-mortem samples or samples taken from individuals who are deceased. There's almost no information regarding any kind of blood levels that are ever done for drugs like this. So I'll repeat what I said earlier. Even though people who commit suicide by hanging void their bladders when they die, there needed to be urine for Chris Benoit's urine to be tested to prove that there was an elevated level of testosterone. Is that fucked up? I think that's pretty damn fucked up. But let's keep going, because Dr. Sperry goes on with his answer to that question. He says, frankly, the call to do so is very, very few and far between, and no one really knows exactly what happens to these hormones after someone dies. So measuring it in the urine is at least a way, first of all, to tell whether or not drugs or drugs like this are present, and then how much is there. Oh, okay. So you needed to have urine to test for testosterone because there's no standard for testing it post-mortem in the blood? Do you see how it was necessary? There had to be urine. So I say again, where's the damn test? Where's the documentation that there was a test done? Dr. Sperry goes on to say, all that can be told from this is that the level is elevated, and the degree of elevation and the ratio of the testosterone to one of the other drugs, the breakdown product called epitestosterone, the elevated level, which we found to be 59. That is an indicator that he had been injecting testosterone. But how much, how frequently, how often, and for how long is something that cannot be answered through this. Well, I'll be damned. So here we go in the medical examiner's own words. They can't tell if this was something he regularly did or if he was doing it excessively. All they can tell is that in the time before he died, he injected testosterone. Interesting, huh? So, another question. Doctor, these results here today, do they shed any light on what happened in that house and why Chris Benoit killed his family and himself? And Dr. Sperry's response is, no, I would not say that they do at all. I'd say these results give answers as far as drug and medication usage. Now, specifically, I think they do show, as I said earlier, that Daniel Benoit was sedated at the time that he was murdered. Beyond that, I don't think they reveal anything at all. And again, the fact that Chris Benoit had been using at least testosterone for some unknown period of time. Does anyone else get the feeling that that bit about the testosterone there at the end was just kind of thrown in? Like an, oh shit, I almost forgot. Let's see, where are we? Question. You said that as far as the Xanax in Daniel, doctors usually don't prescribe Xanax to children. This level that you found, is that toxic? What would that have done to him? And Dr. Sperry's answer to that is, well, it's elevated. It's not in, I would say, a lethal range for the most part. For the most part, okay. So he did not die of a drug overdose. And from our autopsy findings, which I'm not going to discuss today because those investigations are not finished, but there are indicators even at the autopsy that this was really not a drug overdose death. But I think the fact that the Xanax level is elevated really puts some of it into context. As I said, I believe then that Daniel was sedated at the time that he died. And even though here at this point the autopsy findings were not finished yet, you can watch part 11 and 12 of my series and you can see the autopsy results for Chris, Nancy, and Daniel. And in the description box below is a link to a playlist with all my Benoit videos. So, a question. How could the combination of drugs and steroids in Chris Benoit affect his behavior? So you've got this medical examiner saying that somebody gave the child this medication and people just want to keep putting the focus back on steroids. They're not one bit concerned about this child being drugged. And Dr. Sperry's response is, oh, there's really no way to know that at all. As I said, the Xanax and the hydrocodone are at therapeutic level for someone, say, who has chronic pain or is prescribed these drugs on a routine basis. Disagree, but anyway. There are people, I know thousands of folks, Dr. Sperry says, he knows thousands of folks walking around all day out there with these kinds of levels. These are therapeutic. In and of themselves, it really doesn't mean anything. It certainly shows that he was not at a toxic or overdosage level. Now, with respect to the testosterone, this is a question that basically no one knows the answer to. There is conflicting scientific data as to whether or not testosterone creates mental disorders or leads to outbursts of rage. There's data that suggests it, other data that refute it. Essentially, I think Dr. Sperry says he thinks it's an unanswerable question. So Dr. Sperry is essentially saying that it's an unanswerable question as to whether or not testosterone creates mental disorders or leads to outbursts of rage. So then the next question says, do you think the elevation of testosterone in his system might have contributed to some kind of steroid rage? And then just, was this person not listening? Because he just said there's conflicting data. And he thinks it's an unanswerable question. So the next question, do you think it could have contributed to some kind of... And Dr. Sperry responds with, well, as I said, all I can rely upon is the scientific data that's been generated and is known in the medical community to date. And what that information says is that no one really knows. There is nothing conclusive that can be said. And beyond that, I would be speculating. Okay, so in this here, all I can rely upon is the scientific data that's been generated. Yeah, same here. Same here, Dr. Sperry. And until I see a test that shows me that some scientific data has been generated, that Chris Benoit's urine showed this elevated testosterone, then to me, all of this that they're saying here about the testosterone is just speculation because nobody seems to have the document to back this up. So you have a number, 207 micrograms per liter. Cool, but I want to see it. Where's the lab paper with the test results? So then the next question is, question, a range of anything above 6 and below are considered normal? And Sperry says yes. Question, 59, we're talking about a range that is 10 times what the normal range would be. Wait a minute, where's this journalist getting this number of 59? Was there like a handout that they gave to the media ahead of time? And if so, then why doesn't anybody have a copy of this document? You'd think that would be the one out of all of them that they'd want to spread around everywhere and be like, see, we told you so, it was steroids. But in response to 59 being a range that's 10 times normal, Dr. Sperry says yes. To which then the reporter asks, that in itself does not raise any kind of a red flag to you? And Sperry's response is, no. The abnormal elevation in the range is an indicator that he was injecting the testosterone, but the number or the quantity of that ratio really is irrelevant with respect to anything affecting behavior, the psychology of an individual, things like that. And the person asks why, and Sperry says why? Well, because no one really knows. That's what I'm getting to. The scientific data where individuals have been given these drugs and their various levels have been monitored and analyzed. And the long and short of it is that ratio does not, an elevation of that ratio does not translate to something abnormal in a person's thought processes or behavior. So there you have it. Straight from the mouth of the chief medical examiner. A testosterone elevation of this ratio that they're saying Benoit had in his urine would not have translated to something abnormal in Benoit's thought processes or behavior. Now, I do want to point out that it seems to me that people, when they're confronted with the fact that steroids and testosterone likely did not play a part in this crime, the next place they like to jump to is, well, his brain was so fucked up, he didn't know what he was doing. Well, up here, it said, and I'll have to find it, I'll put a screenshot, but it says somewhere up here in this transcript, this crime took planning, coordination. If he had a really messed up brain like an Alzheimer's patient, how could he have planned and coordinated this murder? None of what they're telling us adds up. If you look at it as a whole, like Attorney General Ballard suggested, remember when he said that up here? Sure, you can look at it as, well, it was either steroids or he had a brain injury, because those are the things that you would assume or expect it to be. But when you look closer at all these little pieces, you find that actually there's really no indication of any of that being even true. That's why this just blows my mind about this case. There's so much more to this. And people who refuse to look, shame on you. Shame on you. Because you're not being fair to this family. If you're just willing to condemn this man because it's offensive to you to have somebody suggest that something different could have happened, I just feel like that's pretty sad, that you'd rather continue to believe a lie, even when you're confronted with all of these things that don't add up. You still refuse to question, maybe you were wrong, maybe we were all wrong. That's a special kind of stupid, and I don't even know what to say to people like that. And also, I want to point out that the quote that we're talking about a range that is 10 times what the normal range would be, although Dr. Sperry agrees with that quote that was in that Reuters article we looked at, and all that articles who say Dr. Sperry says it was 10 times the normal range, Dr. Sperry didn't actually say that. The reporter asking the question said that, and Dr. Sperry did agree with it. But right there's a nice little example of how things get twisted. I'm just saying. So let's go on here. The next question right here says, Doctor, there was a report that there was some old needle marks on Daniel's arm. Have you been able to ascertain where those needle marks came from and what drugs were injected? And Dr. Sperry responds with, we were not able to do that. Dr. Eisenstadt found those marks, and I looked at them. They appear to have been needle marks, but because we could not get Basically, we got only a very small amount of urine from Daniel Benoit, and also his body was just beginning to show signs of decomposition. As a consequence, we really did not have enough specimen at all to analyze for human growth hormone or any other substances. And you can see Daniel's autopsy report in part 12 of my previous videos. But there's no mention of any needle marks anywhere in Daniel's autopsy report. And the next question, did the needle marks on his body suggest both fresh marks and healing marks, long-term injection usage? And Sperry's reply, there was nothing that I saw that would lead me to arrive at any conclusions like that. I would say at this point in time, that will never be known. Next question is, do you think Mrs. Benoit was also sedated before she was killed? Which, interesting question, right? She had a pretty high level of painkillers in her blood. But Dr. Sperry says, from these levels, I would say they're therapeutic for an adult in the sense that these are the, again, with the understanding that the decomposition affects the reliability. I mean that these numbers may have been higher, may have been lower at the time that she died. We just don't know that because of the changes that the body fluids and the blood undergo with decomposition. And remember, we talked about that with the confidence intervals, the plus and minus. So he goes on to say, but looking at the levels, as I said, none of them are extremely elevated or in a toxic range. And I do know that she had surgeries in the past, various orthopedic things, and it would not surprise me at all that she was taking these medications because of muscle spasms and pain. Given her previous surgical history, the medication levels, I have no reason to believe she was sedated. So then the next question is, of all of the tests you have run, what stands out then as medically significant or unusual? Dr. Sperry responds, well, that's a broad question. I would say the things that are most significant to me are, number one, that there's clear evidence to me that Daniel Benoit was sedated at the time he was killed. And I think that's of significance, at least to me. That's an unusual finding. I 100% agree. And then he says, and number two, the evidence that although testosterone was found in Christopher Benoit's urine, there was no evidence of any other of the illegal types of steroids or the whole laundry list of anabolic steroids that are out there to be used. And actually, although there's information that may exist out there regarding any medical conditions Chris Benoit may have had, the presence of the testosterone alone even could be an indicator that he was being treated for testicular insufficiency. Well, holy shit. Fucking right. And that is what I want to get at with this testosterone. He had atrophy to his testicles. It's in the autopsy report. You can see that in part 11 of my series. I'll even put the links to the autopsy reports below so that you can look through them and see it. And testosterone injections, it is a therapy for testicular insufficiency. We also have witness statements saying that Nancy was complaining that Chris could not perform in the, quote, marital bedroom. So there you go. 1 + 1 = 2, right? So why do they keep trying to tell us it equals 3 and that it's steroids and rage and brain injury? And then the next question is here at the end. Any evidence that Daniel had a medical condition? And Sperry responds that Daniel had? There's nothing that we could ascertain anyway that I would say there was anything out of the ordinary. Now, I know the question's been raised about the Fragile X syndrome. It says fragile leg syndrome here, but remember, this is a transcript. So it's impossible to perform these types of chromosome analysis tests post-mortem because you need live cells to culture and to grow. And that's something, just because of the fact he's been dead for some period of time, is forever closed to us. And I think that's really a shame. That's sad that for this entire case, at this point, there's so much evidence that's just lost forever. I mean, in addition to this toxicology test on the urine, that being missing, any samples that were taken from these 3 bodies to be tested, they only keep the samples for a brief amount of time. 15 years later, there's no chance they still have these samples. And not only that, there's no possibility of any exhumation because they were all three cremated. So at this point, I don't even know what reopening this case, what kind of good it would do. Even the people who were involved in it, it's been 15 years and memories fade, man. Even vivid memories of these kinds of things. And I don't know, it's just really a shame that some of these answers we'll never have, we'll never know. So let's see, the next question. I thought I read where Benoit had been tested 4 times by the WWE. The 4th time the results were announced. The first 3 times they were not. Were you made privy to the results of the earlier steroid testings by the WWE? Sperry's reply is no. All I know about that is what I have heard on the news. And we all know how reliable that is. And I've certainly not seen any report, and I have no knowledge whatsoever about what they tested for, what they looked for, or frankly anything with respect to perhaps any medical conditions that Chris may have been being treated for anyway. Now, that's an interesting statement coming from the medical examiner because, you see, I believe that if Benoit had been receiving some testosterone therapy for this testicular insufficiency, he would have had to let the WWE know of that. Because if it would show up in his urine tests, they would need to know why it was there. I mean, he would need to protect his employment. The WWE would have needed to be aware of this if this were the case. Also, this could have been something new, a new treatment that Benoit was just beginning, and perhaps when Benoit had that appointment with Dr. Aston on that Friday, June 22nd in 2007, maybe that's what was discussed, this kind of testosterone treatment option. Nobody seems to know what was talked about during that visit, so maybe that's the big secret. I mean, that doctor appointment could have even been the first day of this testosterone treatment. What if Dr. Aston is the one who injected Benoit with the testosterone that Friday? I think that might be a very important question to find the answer to. And maybe more importantly to know is that if this is true about Benoit getting testosterone treatment for testicular atrophy, was the WWE aware of it? And if yes, then when did they become aware of it? But these are just things that come to my head. I'm not at all trying to create excuses for there being an elevated testosterone level. And yes, I do realize that I am doing a lot of speculation here. Normally I try to stay away from that, but in this case, we don't have this document showing this level of testosterone. So I have to fill in the blanks as best I can. And having Dr. Sperry's own words here in this transcript, for me personally, is the closest I can come to verifying that this document actually existed. But now my question is, where the hell is it? Because nobody can seem to find it. And until I can see it with my own eyes, with everything else I've seen in this case, I have to question. And especially with the things I've learned about Dr. Sperry, I'm not exactly sure how trustworthy that man is. So by no means am I willing to trust his word just because it may seem official. But let me get through this. I'd like to get through this transcript, and then in the next video, I'm going to show you some other things about Dr. Sperry. This next question says, I know that there were a lot of prescription drugs that were discovered at the house. Were there any other steroids that were at the home that were perhaps obviously not discovered in Chris Benoit's body? Oh my God. The press just can't let it go. They just keep pushing. Were there steroids at the home maybe that he didn't get around to taking yet? I mean, just whatever. So Sperry says, I don't have personal knowledge of whatever else was found, and at this point in time, I think that falls under investigative information that is still being analyzed. Now, you can see what prescription drugs were discovered in the house. In part 5 of my video series, the part where after they get the search warrant, when they can open drawers and go through closets, they found a lot of prescription medications. You can see all that in part 5. So then again, another question. Doctor, can you clear this up for me? You said there was testosterone found in Chris Benoit's body. So again, hey, I heard about prescription medications. Forget about that. Tell me more. Clear this up for me about this testosterone. What the fuck? And Dr. Sperry says yes. And then follow-up question. But then we see the epitestosterone. And Sperry's like, yeah. And follow-up question. Explain that once again and clear me up. So Sperry says, all right, every male, especially those of us with receding hairlines, manufacture testosterone, and a breakdown product of the testosterone is the epitestosterone. So in analyzing the urine of an adult male who has normally functioning testicles, there are amounts of testosterone that will be found and a corresponding but smaller amount of epitestosterone. And usually, that ratio of testosterone to epitestosterone, or T to E, is about 6 or less. So the finding then of the extremely elevated T to E ratio means that the testosterone is much more elevated, and the only way that can occur in a situation like this is from the administration or injection of testosterone. Oh, well, I want to say again, it talks about receding hairlines and an adult male who has normally functioning testicles. We know Chris Benoit didn't have normally functional testicles because it states that on his autopsy report, and it also states that he had a receding hairline. So to me, this all explains the testosterone. I just think it makes sense. We know Nancy was complaining about Chris being unable to, quote, perform, and we know that he had a doctor's appointment that Friday. We also know that they are saying that the only thing they can tell is that he had injected the testosterone within a short time before he died. And we know police didn't find any evidence of any rage in the home. And we have the medical examiner right here in this press conference saying that this level of testosterone would not have caused any disturbances in Chris Benoit's mood or mental processes. So it just makes sense to me that perhaps Benoit was talking to his doctor about problems with his marriage, not being able to perform, and perhaps he received his first treatment of this testosterone therapy that day. But what do you think? Do you think this is a possibility, or am I completely nuts? Comment below, let me know. So then the next question right here is to Mr. Ballard, the district attorney. Mr. Ballard, what do you do, if anything, with these results? How do they affect your investigation? And Scott Ballard, Fayette County, Georgia District Attorney, his response is, we're trying to envision as best we can what happened inside that household while these murders were taking place and while the suicide was taking place. This adds one element that we can consider along with all the other elements that are being investigated. So it's a little unclear to know exactly where this leads us. But you take this piece and you compare it with what a witness said or what was found at the scene, and suddenly the picture begins to come more into focus, and that's what we certainly hope to do. Well, all right, because that's exactly the same thing I'm trying to do with this series of videos. And I'm looking at the exact same evidence they looked at, so why am I coming up with completely different scenarios than they did? In the next question, it says, Doctor, any idea why Daniel would be sedated? But then Scott Ballard answers. Is Scott Ballard a doctor? Or was that question for Dr. Sperry and Scott Ballard just decided to answer? I don't know. But Ballard replies, I could speculate, but right now I'm not going to. Which I found funny because that sounds like me in a lot of previous videos. I could speculate, but I'm not going to do that. Not yet. So I would like to know what Scott Ballard's speculation was as to why Daniel would be sedated. There's actually quite a few people that I would love to talk to hear what their thoughts are about this whole case. So then the next question is, have you been satisfied with the level of cooperation all the way around, including the WWE? And Ballard says, yes, I have. I know that this is an emotional issue for so many people, but we found that the level of cooperation has been good. There have been an awful lot of help, in quotes, so I guess he did air quotes, that's been offered to us via emails and otherwise from concerned people with theories. And we've tried to actually look at those and sort through them to find the ones that are useful. Of course, very few of those are going to suggest anything we haven't already thought of. Oh, well, aren't you brilliant? I'm sorry for being so cynical, but I think that we've seen a lot of things that point out that, they haven't really thought of everything. And then the next question, can I ask you the same question I asked the doctor? The previous drug test that the WWE administered to Chris, have you been privy to those results, and what do those results say? And Ballard says, I personally have not. The sheriff's office may know, but I don't know. And then now Holmes cuts in here. We've been listening to this press conference here in Georgia. We are waiting. We have been awaiting the toxicology report on the pro wrestler Chris Benoit, who police say killed his wife and his young son before hanging himself. So much speculation after that double murder-suicide about steroids possibly being used. Some things and drugs were found at his house, but toxicology reports have maybe not really given the answers that many people thought it might. According to the doctors there, the level of drugs in his system don't really reveal anything about his behavior. The levels of a couple drugs in his body were at a therapeutic level, not toxic levels, not elevated levels, and also the testosterone found in his urine as well, but none of that suggests, according to the chief medical examiner here in Georgia, none of that suggests that it would have had any adverse effects on his behavior. And this is the CNN anchor's recap that I'm reading now. He goes on to say also something coming out of the press conference that his son, the young son, 7-year-old Daniel, did have Xanax in his system, in his blood, at a relatively high level, and that's certainly not something that would usually be prescribed to a child, which led the medical examiner to believe that, in fact, the 7-year-old child was sedated at the time that he died, and also the wife, Nancy, had 3 different drugs in her system. But also those were not at an elevated level, at a therapeutic level, according to the medical examiner there. And of course, Chris Benoit was known as the Canadian crippler inside the ring. Well, out of the ring, he was reportedly named in an investigation into an alleged illegal steroid distribution network. And so you know I will be doing a video about this online pharmacy. So all of this still adds to the mystery. And again, the toxicology reports may be of some surprise to people. We are going to talk to Sports Illustrated senior investigative reporter Luis Fernando Llosa, who has written extensively about the case and joins us now with his thoughts on today's toxicology reports. So I'm not going to go into that. I'll put a link to this transcript below if you want to read further. And I'll probably have to end this video here, but I'll do what I usually do. I'll try to upload them both at the same time because I wanted to build this basis of this press conference with Dr. Sperry talking about this elevated level of testosterone. And I wanted you to be aware of the fact that according to the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's Crime Lab, I have all of the documents that they have available in their system. And I don't have a urine test that shows any elevated levels of testosterone. So in the next part, what I'm going to do is show you some evidence that this Dr. Sperry was one corrupt chief medical examiner. I was going to say something else, but I feel like I need to be very careful with this part because I'm not accusing Dr. Sperry of anything, but it is really strange that nobody can seem to find this toxicology test about the testosterone. I think that clearly Dr. Sperry saw some sort of document or received a memo from somebody who told him what to say about it, because he wouldn't just pull this number 207 out of his head. So what happened to that document? In the next part, I'm going to show you some evidence that I found that, in my opinion, proves to me that Dr. Sperry is somewhat corrupt, to put it lightly, and I question whether or not we can even take his word about this elevated level of testosterone. We can validate everything that he said because we have the documents from the Georgia Bureau of Investigations to back it up, but we can't validate what he says about the testosterone. We don't have a document about the toxicology on the urine. And that's not a conspiracy theory. That's not me trying to make excuses for Benoit's actions. That's a fact. It's a simple fact. And if Dr. Sperry was a corrupt medical examiner, and I think he was, and I'll show you why I think that. But if that's the case, then logically, we have to question whether this post-mortem toxicology on the urine even existed in the first place. But I guess we'll talk about that the next time. If you'd like to support my channel and help support the research that I do, there's a link in the description box to my Cash App, followed by a link to a YouTube video with very simple instructions for how to donate. To all of you who've been donating, I appreciate it so much. You have no idea how much your support means to this channel. Don't forget to hit that thumbs up button and subscribe. That really helps get more eyes on my research, and share with anybody you think might be interested in this. The more eyes on this, the better. Let's get people talking about this again. There's clearly more to be discussed here. And you have been listening to AMK at Purple Sky 11. Thank you as always for your time in watching this video, and I hope you have a great day. Bye!